Well, that's just one of the most unserious games that I've ever seen from the Warriors in a playoff game. It's very upsetting, but I'm not devastated because the things that Steve Kerr is doing, and I have been saying this all along, the lineups that he's choosing to play, the guys that he's choosing in the rotation, these small lineups and all this stuff, especially on the road, is unserious because it's essentially Russian roulette. You're basically relying on the offensive capability of some of these smaller lineups. And if the offense is not going to come through, they almost always struggle on the defensive end of the floor. Always. I've never seen an NBA coach try to play a 3-guard lineup in the playoffs, and said 3-guard lineup size is 6'2", 6'4", 6'4". On top of that, he's trying to redefine who Buddy Hield is in the NBA. Buddy Hield's been in the NBA for a decade. Never ever known as a POA type guy. Never known as a small forward. And yet, once again, Steve Kerr thinks that he's reinventing the wheel, talking about how he thinks Buddy Hield is a better defender than people think he is. Yeah, maybe he'll look like it at times against an inexperienced Jalen Green in the playoffs, but even if he does an affordable job against Jalen Green, there's an overall size problem that breaks up the unity of the team's structure when it comes to the defense. For example, there may be a possession where Buddy Hield may end up doing well on Jalen Green. And then say they go down on the offensive end of the floor, they can't get anything going, the Rockets get a stop, and now the Rockets are out in transition, and all of a sudden Buddy Hield ends up on a cross match against Amen Thompson, and Amen Thompson scores on Buddy Hield like Buddy Hield is not even there. See, in the transition game, there's always going to be cross matches, and when there's only 2 forwards on the floor and there's 3 guards that are constantly trying to get back in transition, but they just don't have the size to deal with whatever is coming their way when players are moving in full speed downhill. You need more size in general to be able to combat stuff like that defensively, and you can't do that when 3 of the 5 guys on the floor are 6'4" or under. You're making the game more difficult for Steph Curry. Steph Curry, as well as Jimmy Butler, need to be surrounded by reliable defenders that can get the job done on the defensive end of the floor. You need to be able to rely on stops in the playoffs, and you need to be able to muck up a game. And well, it's pretty impossible to do that when you're running a 3-guard lineup, and Draymond is already too small at the 5, and Butler is too small at the 4. And I say too small because they no longer have any help from the extra small forward position, and they're left on an island to guard the power forward and center spot by themselves. Are they able to survive those things in short bursts and stretches? Sure. Is that something you want to do to them long term in the playoffs, to start every single game that way? No, it's ridiculous. It's taxing. And you're completely gambling the game. There's no set fundamental structure to make their defense consistently strong and reliable. And tonight on the road, this was a really good example. That starting unit, that small unit, allows the Rockets to score 20 points in the first 5 minutes of the game. 20 points. And role players play worse on the road because they have no support from the fans and they're playing in a hostile environment with more pressure. If Buddy Hield is playing really well, you can use him off the bench for however long he's able to stay hot for. But to then say, oh, I'm going to put him in the starting lineup and I'm going to allow the possibility of the Warriors defense completely breaking apart, that's the gamble that I'm talking about. Aside from that example I gave you where Amen Thompson is out in transition and the only guy that he sees in front of him is Buddy Hield, how those things can't happen. And then there are other times, for example, in that third quarter, Steve still has that tiny lineup out there. Meanwhile, the Rockets have already put in Steven Adams into the game. And even though to start the third quarter, the Warriors are scoring a little bit, but on the other end of the floor, they're just giving up all the easy points. Steven Adams, there's not a single human being in that starting lineup that can box out Steven Adams on their own. So he comes into the game and immediately gets an uncontested putback. And then on the following possession, Fred VanVleet blows by his guy and he's getting into the lane and there's nobody that is protecting the rim and Fred VanVleet just lays the ball up. And this is the kind of stuff that is completely unserious in the playoffs. There's no force for the Warriors defensively, and if you don't do that and you extend the series like this completely unnecessarily, and the older guys like Jimmy Butler, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, you need to rest them as much as possible. You need to be able to take care of a game like this. And instead, Steve Kerr puts out a lineup that a G League team can easily score on and rebound over. Look, man, to be able to play reliable defense in the NBA in the playoffs, you need prerequisite size and you need prerequisite length. And without those things, you are giving up fundamental disadvantages. And again, Steve Kerr is doing this willingly And people got excited about this and they started defending it because they were able to get away with it the last couple of games. You're not going to consistently be able to get away with that in the playoffs. And I promise you, it's only going to get worse. Provided they can get out of the first round, it's only going to get worse when they face better teams in the following rounds. We have more to cover, but if you like the content so far, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and hit that like button so that this video gets out to all the Warriors fans out there. And you know what? To all the basketball fans out there in general, because we all need to understand these basic principles and fundamentals of the game of basketball and how Steve Kerr thinks that somehow he's the only one that is reinventing the wheel. He's not, and these casual things that he's doing is a part of the reason why the Warriors are going back home in a Game 6 situation and pretty much a must-win game situation because they've given us no assurance that they're definitely going to be able to win a game on the road if it ends up going to a Game 7. Anyway, to summarize the game from the jump, the Warriors gave up 15 straight points to the Rockets to end up in a 20-8 deficit. And needless to say, the Rockets obviously got some help from the refs early on. The refs were blowing the whistle left and right against the Warriors. Steph Curry picks up 2 early fouls, and the Rockets end up going to the line 13 times in that first quarter. The Warriors went to the line 0 times in the first quarter. The Rockets went to the line 13 times in the first quarter. I mean, talk about the fix being in. But the thing about that is that the Warriors have always had to overcome ref manipulation, NBA corruption, and all this stuff. And when they're fundamentally sound, they're usually able to overcome those various factors where they end up playing 5-on-8. But usually when the Warriors have to end up going 5 versus 9 because they also have to fight and overcome the ideologies of Steve Kerr, well, usually that ends up being too much. And the Warriors ultimately allow 40 points in that first quarter. And Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler are held scoreless in that first quarter. I feel like the Warriors with the 3-1 lead got really casual and cute about what kind of offense that they're running ultimately. Because you know what the Warriors do to start every game, especially when they start those small lineups, is Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler doing cardio while Draymond and Potts and these other guys are trying to get their shots up. And that stuff barely works in the regular season and is especially not going to be good enough in the postseason. And when you start off that slowly on the road, sometimes it's really hard to get back into a rhythm as the game continues. And yeah, ultimately Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry never truly got going in this game. If the Warriors want to play serious basketball, they got to prioritize and organize around Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler even to start the game. So rely on those two guys to carry your offense and create your offense and have a bunch of defenders around them to fortify their defense. So even if they struggle out of the gates offensively like they did in this game, they'll still be more sound defensively and won't allow the other team to just completely go off on you. And again, how do you play better defense? You put more capable bodies on the floor that play better defense, that are able to grab rebounds better, that have more length to be able to contest shots in general, and voila! You're playing better defense with a better defensive unit. It's really that simple. And until Steve Kerr and his coaching staff, and even the players, decide to collectively get together and get more serious about what lineups you're putting out there, I have a really hard time trusting that this team is going to be good enough to get it done, to be able to overcome those kinds of deficits and those kinds of handicaps. I just don't see it. Man, Steve Kerr's irrational love for Buddy Hield, I understand that Buddy Hield can at times come through for you, but to completely then over-rely on it and then turn him into a starter and do all this crazy stuff that Steve loves to do because he just loves Buddy Hield and show me any good sign of Buddy Hield playing good basketball, oh, I'm going to amplify him to the max above anybody else. Meanwhile, a guy like Guy Santos makes one mistake and he is glued to the bench, never to be seen ever again for the rest of the game. But guess what? They really needed Guy Santos in this one. He came into the game late in the first quarter, managed to hit 2 3-point shots. And you want to hear something really crazy? In the early part of the game, the Warriors bench scored 21 points. The starters had 8 points. That starting unit was a complete and utter failure. And it's not just on one player. I'm not saying that, oh, it's all Buddy Hield's fault. But as a unit, they completely failed. And that's what can happen when you go to something silly like a 3-guard lineup in the playoffs. And honestly, there's some context to 3-guard lineups as well. There could be a guard in there that's a really good rebounder and a really good defender that negates the fact that he's a guard. And well, if you had 3 guys like that as a 3-guard unit, that would be more palatable. But the Warriors don't have that kind of personnel. That's why it makes less sense for for them to be running a 3-guard lineup. They do have certain lineups where they may be able to run these certain lineups in short bursts and stretches, and depending on what kind of lineups that you're playing against, but most of the teams in the playoffs are too big for the Warriors to be doing that stuff. You may be able to get away with it in some games, and you may not be able to get away with it in other games, and that's the kind of gamble that you don't want to take if you're a real serious team. And by the way, just to wrap up the point about how the refs had to fix in for this game early on to give the Rockets an advantage so that they can extend the series, I mean, they're just calling all the fouls for the Rockets, touch foul, whatever. Meanwhile, I want you to take a look at this play where Steph Curry is taking a shot, and you'd be pretty hard pressed to tell me that there was no contact on this play. And you know Steph Curry is dealing with a sprained thumb. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but you gotta take a look at this photo. Yeah, look at his right thumb, man. That thing is jacked up. So again, Steph Curry is playing through something. Jimmy Butler is playing through something. You don't need to be extending a series like this whatsoever. These guys need as much rest as possible. And especially against a dirty team like the Rockets. I mean, you look at that play and it just looks like they're targeting Steph Curry's thumb. And it's really disgusting, man. They're literally swiping at him. This is not defending a shot. This is defending a shot. And the refs are just allowing the Rockets to do whatever. And that's not the first time they targeted Steph Curry's thumb either. But yes, getting back to Guy Santos, Steve Kerr finally did put out a lineup that I actually liked in that second quarter. It was Steph Curry, Moses Moody, Jimmy Butler, Guy Santos, and Kevon Looney. And that's a good defensive unit. That unit ended up going on a 9-1 stretch. That brought the game back within distance because by the midpoint of that second quarter, it was a 30-point game. The Warriors were down by 30 points. And Quinton Post, I appreciate the 5 points that he scored when he got into that first quarter. 5 early points. That was great. However, he's in these lineups where he's being asked to protect a 3-guard lineup and he can't do it. Quinton Post already has defensive issues as it is. The last thing he needs is for Steve Kerr to tax him even more and ask him to protect a 3-guard lineup and anchor that. Those are things that most centers on this team cannot do. Quinton Post cannot do it. Trayce Jackson-Davis cannot do it. The only guy that has ably protected lineups like that is Kevon Looney. That's it. And even for him, when the Rockets go to some of these bigger lineups, Looney can't do it by himself. I want you guys to think about how the Warriors ended up winning the previous game. They had an all-defensive unit. They had a bigger lineup, Jimmy Butler, Kevon Looney, Draymond Green, right? And then Draymond Green is out on Alperen Şengün, and he forces Şengün to take a shot from further than where he wanted to shoot. Great defense, but that's not where the defense ends. If you watch that play, it's Kevon Looney boxing the hell out of Steven Adams with his life. And guess what? He was still kind of getting beat because Steven Adams is that strong and he's that good of a rebounder. And that's why you need a third guy that is capable of getting into that paint and attacking the glass. And that was Jimmy Butler. And Jimmy Butler ended up grabbing that defensive rebound to complete that defensive possession. And that's how you form good defensive units. You get stops, you get rebounds, you get out in transition, and then you rely on Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry. And with bigger lineups also, you have more screening ability, bigger bodies, and those things will also help you create separation. But notice in these smaller lineups, who's setting the screen? Draymond? No, he's busy trying to create as a passer. Same thing for Jimmy Butler. There's basically very little screening out on the floor. At least reliable screening. When you have 3 guards on the floor, and what, they're gonna screen for each other? It's not gonna create enough space, and it's not gonna happen consistently enough. Again, we are looking for consistency, a consistent style of play that yields consistent results in terms of not only getting a stop, but also completing it with a rebound. So many people talk about, oh, the Warriors defense has been the best since they brought Jimmy Butler aboard. And yes, there's truth to it, but they could be much better and reach another level when they go bigger and are able to get more rebounds, because we have seen over and over and over again the Warriors get stops and then the other team grabs an offensive rebound and then you have to play another defensive possession, and at times they give up 2, 3, sometimes even 4 offensive rebounds in a single possession. It's insane. Now, when it comes to that, I'm generally talking about the Warriors and what happens to them when they run these lineups that are not good enough from an all-around standpoint. Because in this particular game, it's actually the Warriors that grab all the offensive rebounds. And that's how they got back into this game. By the way, in that third quarter, Steve Kerr once again ran the same lineup and it wasn't good enough. And next thing you know, there's about 5.5 minutes left in that third quarter. It's a 29-point deficit and Steve Kerr waves the white flag in the middle of the third quarter of a playoff game. Do you understand how embarrassing and humiliating that is? Usually, when a team gives up, it's at least after the end of the third quarter, not in the middle of it. And by the way, because Steve Kerr played more Guy Santos in that second quarter, the Warriors turned that 30-point deficit into a 21-point deficit. And in a game where the Warriors were down by 30 points, there was a single player that was in the positive, and that was Guy Santos. And yet, in the final 4 minutes of the game, Steve Kerr elected to take him out in favor of Buddy Hield, and whatever momentum they were able to build up, they gave it all right back in the final 3-4 minutes of the game in the second quarter. And again, as for the type of offense the Warriors run, there's just not enough killer mentality in Steve Kerr. Instead of trying to create a bunch of opportunities for Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler, and again, form a strong defense around them, and allowing a bunch of Buddy Hield, pods, and Draymond shots. And again, that's the thing about the way Steve Kerr does things. These things are a gamble. Sometimes these guys are going to come through, and sometimes these guys are definitely not going to come through. This whole damn season, man, I am looking for consistency, something the Warriors can consistently do, and not get these results that are just all over the map. And being able to defend the paint is really freaking important in general, but especially in the playoffs. That is what mucks up the game. You just allow easy points in the paint, force the other team to become a jump shooter. It's the Warriors who are just jump shooting all day and night and can never get anything in the paint because they're running small lineups and non-finishers. Yeah, the Rockets had a plus 16 advantage points in the paint in that first half. 76 points in the first half of a playoff game. Just absolutely insane. And again, how do you allow a bunch of easy paint points? Well, you have a 3-guard lineup and you're persistently small, and the other team, even if they're not shooting well, they're able to stay in the game because they keep getting easy points in the paint. And then on a night like tonight, where they're shooting off the wall, well, this is what happens. So run into a team that is more consistent from the perimeter, and you know that any and every team is going to get easy points in the paint, and the Warriors are going to run into trouble. And here's the really funny thing. In that fourth quarter, it's a blowout game. Steve Kerr has given up, and he throws in all of his remaining players that are on his bench, and it's essentially a 3-forward lineup or a 4-forward lineup. These lineups are just bigger across the board. There's only one small guy on the floor, and that's Pat Spencer. Big shout out to Pat Spencer. The guy has been really good whenever he's been given an opportunity, and for him to play as well as he did in this game, and this is not the first time that he's played well in this playoffs. He's a really good player, and he's a guy that has a lot of poise when he's on the floor at that point guard position. And he was protected by a lot of forwards, and crazy enough, that unit was a plus 10 immediately in the first 4 minutes of the game. Yeah, at some point, Kevin Knox was a plus 16 in that fourth quarter, and Trayce Jackson-Davis was a plus 14. Alongside Braxton Key and Moses Moody. And you know what's really crazy? With about 6 minutes left to go, this game came within distance, and in the final 5 minutes or so in the game, it was like a 13-point deficit. 13-point deficit? Steph Curry can cover 13 points in a 2-minute span. If the game gets that close, Steve Kerr has to bring his starters back in. At the bare minimum, he needs to bring back Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry and see what they can make of it. But no. Steve Kerr is casually just watching it happen. Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler are just sitting there chilling. Hey, you're within striking distance here, and you're not even thinking about coming back into the game? I've just never seen anything like it. This is the playoffs. How do you just flat out give up? This is just one of the most inexplicable and disappointing things that I've seen in a while. The Rockets had lost so much momentum, even with their starters back in. Yes, the starters of the Rockets had to come back into the game because it was starting to get dangerous. And even then, the Warriors' third unit is giving their first unit a fight. Towards the end there, Pat Spencer gives Dillon Brooks a shove on a layup attempt. Alperen Sengun gets in his face, and Pat Spencer, defending himself, gave Sengun a little nudge on the head. And watching all that unfold, Trayce Jackson comes into the picture and just manhandles Sengun out of the way. And I love seeing Trayce get in there and playing the role of an intimidator. Honestly, I wish he would do a lot more of that when he was in rotation. But again, see, You look at that lineup that Steve had out there, and it's not because that lineup has a ton of talent. We're talking about Kevin Knox, Braxton Key, and Trayce Jackson-Davis here, alongside Pat Spencer and Moses Moody. And yet they were able to completely outplay the Rockets because they were bigger, they were playing better defense, getting stops, getting rebounds, and as a matter of fact, attacking the offensive glass themselves. They were dominating the Rockets on the offensive end of the floor. That's a large part of the reason why they were able to outscore the Rockets the way they did, because they kept getting these offensive rebounds and offensive putbacks. That bench unit grabbed 18 offensive rebounds in that fourth quarter. You see, if the Warriors go a little bit bigger, they can give right back to the other team what the other team does to the Warriors when they're too small. Shout out to Moses Moody as well. He played really well in the fourth quarter, and he was basically their best player, and he fought his tail off. But I can't emphasize enough, the Warriors have necessary pieces to go bigger and form more imposing defenses. And it's when they do this, it's when Steve Kerr and his coaching staff decides to fundamentally change what they're doing, is when the Warriors will become a more serious team. They will reach the next level because they will be able to play a type of defense consistently for a chunk of the game that will put them a tier or two even above a team like the Rockets. But as long as Steve Kerr continues to go with these Russian roulette, totally gambling lineups that are going to show up or not show up in any given game, and that's the kind of stuff that is going to force the Warriors out of the playoffs sooner than they planned. I'm here to fight to ensure that that doesn't happen. We'll see what happens moving forward. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.